Like and subscribe right now, or else this will be in your bed tonight. r/ask Reddit by Planet Reddit. People who work in law enforcement. What is work like right now? Facebook friend is a cop. They gave him 24 hours off yesterday. Before that he put in 100 hours in 7 days. He pretty much slept through his day off. Yep, my brother's a cop. Has worked 20+ hour days in the past week. My dad's retired yet. He's spent grueling hours on his boat with a grin this week. Mayo. If the boat's called the Happy Retirement and they ask him to come back for one more case, you best be concerned. I wonder how many are considering new career paths. I was considering becoming a policeman as a backup plan. Having studied systemic racism, cop culture and multiple flaws of the police system for the past year, I was confident the awareness brought by my university program would allow those who would join the police to be better than the current ones. However, I am kinda worried about the social etiquette that'll come with joining the ranks now. Good thing it's a backup plan, I guess. Yep, cop culture is a very complex subject. It's possible these protests might reinforce its toxicity, but at the same time, they're necessary and they might lead to a reformed police system that can deal with these issues. Fingers crossed. The idea is to dismantle police forces and force them to be vetted and reapply for their jobs. If they're not bent, they've got nothing to worry about. My cousin is in an outer suburb of Minneapolis and he just became a cop. He said Friday night, when the protests and riots were happening, when he worked was the hardest night of his life. The chief officer said he hadn't seen anything like this in the past 18 years he served there. A friend of mine is in the army and she said she's been on active duty this entire time and it's been super long for her. I witnessed the effects of the riots firsthand and it's crazy. I don't think this city has ever seen something like this in most people's lifetimes. Maybe in the past, but not the current generations. My dad grew up in Minneapolis, not far from where Floyd was murdered, and he says that there wasn't anything like this in the 60s there. As in, the 60s were better or worse? Well, there weren't cameras. From a relative whose husband works for the Secret Service at the White House. My husband was on the front lines of the recent White House protest. It was a long night for me, but it was a much longer night for many others. We see the burning buildings, the broken glass, we hear about the tear gas and barricades. What we don't hear and see is this. This is what my husband remembers most. He remembers the bridge makers. The people there that are angry, hurt and in pain but they build a bridge anyway. The people that are scared, tired, and struggling but build a bridge anyway. They see the way through this as peaceful and hopeful. He told me of a black woman whose face is frozen in his mind. She stood between him and a swarming group of people who wished death, violence and all other kinds of things upon him. Shouting back at him she said, "I got you." Shouting to the protesters she said, "This isn't the way. These voices are being drowned out." But I believe these voices are the ones who will not just change minds but change hearts. I have no judgment to pass because I can't understand. But I want people to know that mixed with the sad, terrible, and ugly there is hope. There are bridges. I'm curious how those agents feel about Trump and how he handles these situations, in many cases making it harder, much harder for them to do their jobs. I'm curious how many of them know their Roman imperial history. Fiddles and Nero. I wish there were a million more like you. Thanks for your service. You truly understand what that word means. That's the thing. Most of the cops are like him. My friend is a firefighter near a major city having riots. This Saturday night, they received multiple calls for dumpster fires, would respond, and instead of finding a fire would be pelted with bricks and such. This happened so many times, they stopped responding to anything but building fires to at least attempt to stay safe. They tried to help people and were punished for it. I understand the anger, but that was not a productive channel for it. I understand people are mad at police but it's not all of them. And what did firefighters do to all of a sudden deserve anything? Who knows? There's a lot of misdirected anger as well as people just taking advantage of a bad situation to do bad things. Looters for example. What firefighters did was be perceived as authority figures. I wish I was joking. It's exhausting and depressing. I can't go an hour without someone flipping me off or screaming "Uck the police." I'm just as upset about the murder of George Floyd and police brutality in general as anyone else. I wanted to be a cop to make a positive difference in my community. I work for an incredible agency that hires high caliber folks, and I've never once seen any of my co-workers do their jobs with any malice of hatred toward anyone. I just want to be happy to go to work again. That's so sad to hear. Stay positive. I'm a police officer in a town in the middle of England. It feels pretty detached from what's happening in America, or even what's happening in London. We had protests over Saturday and Sunday, but there was very little overt police presence, in what I think was a deliberate act by our chief constable. As an organization, we've more or less said that we stand beside the protesters, but we will have to take action if there is violence. In the UK, we police by consent, so the police need to imbue a sense of trust in what they do. Otherwise it wouldn't work. There's always a small minority in any protest that appears to only be there to cause problems, or is looking for a fight with the police, or with other protesters. But by and large, the vast majority of protesters where I am seem to be there for the right reasons. Work for me has more or less carried on as normal up to this point. But if the UK is put through a second wave of COVID-19, and there is still civil unrest around the BLM movement, I think we might start struggling to police the way we have been. American living in England for the past 5 years here. Thanks for your comment. I've been wondering what UK cops thought about what's going on in my country. I love the way policing is done here. Yes, there are bad cops here too. But the whole policing by consent practice makes people here feel much more like the police are a force for good. I was really struck when I started living here by how English cops seem to approach situations. Calm, working intelligently and rationally. I'm so used to seeing cops behave like raging bullies in the USA that the difference was amazing. My first month here, a man was acting up in the parking lot of a grocery store. Seemed drunk, drugged out, maybe mentally ill, maybe all of those things. He was yelling at people, throwing things around. The cops came. I braced myself for what I've seen happen in the USA. More often than not, guns drawn, screaming, throw the guy on the ground, hit him a few times, cuff, throw him in the cruiser. But the English cops who showed up actually took some time to talk the guy down, explained calmly why people were freaked out by his behavior, and offered him some options about what could happen next. They could take him to a hospital to get a psych eval, or they could call a relative, etc. One of them went into the store and bought the guy a bottle of water and a sack of Wotsits. I was blown away. The guy calmed down, decided he probably needed the psych eval, and went with them happily enough. I agree with this. I'm American but moved to the UK last year and have had similar experiences. I was pleasantly surprised by the difference in approach and policing culture here as well. I still tense up when I see flashing lights behind me, but it's nice to know that will subside. In the States, I've seen cops even on the tame end bully people for stupid little things just because they're bored, or do things like tail people just because they know it'll freak them out. I've also seen some tase and wrestle a homeless guy to the ground for running through the BART station naked. I've also known some really good US cops that are more self-aware of the power they wield and do so responsibly, and I'd guess there are quite a few like that. It's really disheartening to see the actions of a shitty few get plastered over all the others, and even more so to see it getting condoned, borderline encouraged by the president of all people, so that others feel it's okay to behave that way and the problem is further perpetuated. Can you explain what you mean by police with consent? That confused me because it sounds like you ask the suspects first to make sure they're alright with being arrested. You probably should have added a serious tag to this. I was gonna tell you that it didn't matter because the serious replies tend to be the top comments. But oh boy, the trolls are coming quick. We had a vigilante ambush our sheriffs yesterday. One of the officers died. A young man with his second child due next week. That on top of protests, COVID ordinance upkeep. My friends in law enforcement are having a hard time. Edit. I misuse the word vigilante. I don't think vigilante is the right word. I think the right word would be murderers. Though those terms are not mutually exclusive. Murder is about killing people. Being a vigilante is about enforcing justice without authority. Someone can certainly be both. One example I can think of is that guy that shot his child's rapist. Didn't he get killed by some kind of domestic? I work in a smaller police department in NJ. We have a protest this week and the department is walking with the protesters. Surrounding departments have had their protests and all were peaceful. In the US there is a divide in how police are held to certain standards. There are small to mid-sized municipal departments with a relatively decent town population. The pay is high and the standards are higher in the job. If you muck up it's you're behind. We get a lot of mandatory training with more that gets piled on every year, especially de-escalation and dealing with mentally unstable persons. I work in this area and am typically looked down upon by the bottom departments I'm about to describe because we aren't real cops and our job is too easy. City departments and those large sheriff departments in the south are usually the places with the problems. There are a lot of cops to be accounted for and corruption is usually citywide going all the way to the mayor sometimes. In a lot of respects, HBO's The Wire is a very accurate representation of most, not all, cities. The pay is usually not as good and the hours are worse. It's also a lot easier to get hired into these jobs so the candidate pool is naturally shittier. State police are busy sucking their own D and can do no wrong. No one likes them. Joking. Can someone import that style of politicking here, please? My midsize, Alabama city tear-gassed and rubber bulleted a peaceful protest on Wednesday with the mayor's blessing. Then the mayor left town on vacation the next day. Our police chief had a press conference where he showed an Antifa poster that was literally a quote from the Declaration of Independence. They showed everyone why there's protests. I work in a somewhat rural and tourist-driven area. My department has a good reputation and strong community support, which is nice. We have had peaceful protests that were attended by local department leaders and no rioting. I have noticed people being more emboldened, for lack of a better word, trying to butt into legitimate law enforcement business, yelling, videoing and making the situation much more tense than it needs to be and take far longer than it should, which not only impacts officers but also the people we interact with who were perfectly fine before an uninvolved person felt the need to escalate the situation for no reason. The shitty part is the unknown. I am entering my 9th year. I am proud of what I do. I have never had a sustained complaint of any type. Never had an excessive force complaint. I am not perfect because I am human, but everything I do at work is above board. If I wouldn't bet my job that the violation I saw occurred or the person I arrested did the crime, then I don't do it. I'll catch the next one. Now I have to worry about some anarchist setting my house on fire with my kids inside because my patrol car is parked there? That's bullshit, and it has already happened to an officer in Jacksonville, FL this week when his patrol car was torched right in front of his home while his family was sleeping inside. I teach at the local police academy and it was very hard to get qualified candidates before this started. The standards have been continually lowered since I started and I expect it to continue. I am one of those people who decided not to become a cop years and years ago cause I don't like what a lot of cops do. The system is rotten from the top down. Sure, there might be some good cops like you, but you are a cog in a corrupted wheel of a system. If the standards of policing were actually largely raised and police were properly held accountable when they did things wrong, normal good people would be more interested in signing up. Most normal good people, like myself, take a look at policing and say like that. I don't want to work in a system that actively hurts a lot of people it swears to protect. I don't dispute that there are issues with the entire criminal justice system. I know of agencies with deservedly horrific reputations. It takes good leadership and accountability to fix those issues. I would never work somewhere without that. The agency I work for is completely transparent. Off the top of my head, I know several employees my department has fired and arrested, prosecuted for various things that some places would be swept under the rug. I am more than fine with that. We need more of it. When I teach the academy, I stress how hard it is to get this job and how one momentary lapse of judgment or wrong decision can take it all away. The department can do a lot of things to you, but they cannot take your integrity. Only the individual person can willingly give that up. I wish the standards were higher and more publicly known to recruit better people. The pay doesn't help that either, and I fear this push to defund the police will again make it worse. If they came and told me tomorrow I could keep my job but I need to take a $10, $15,000 pay cut because of budget cuts, I would immediately resign. No question about it. It is a very simple risk versus reward equation. This right here is my fear as well. A cop buddy of mine quit his job. had been coming to a head, and this felt like the right move for him as the department wasn't making changes anytime fast. Australia here. Thanks to the COVID restrictions, a lot of the regular crime was down. But then resources were needed for border closures and self-quarantine checks and other COVID-related patrols, so probably same as usual. Go to say I feel for Leos in America. Whole lot of them are probably as disgusted as the public by the actions of those officers who killed GF, but they're copping the brunt of the community's anger about it. My close friend is a cop in NOLA right now. She says her day-to-day is pretty hectic because of the protests. Sort by controversial and buckle the yuck up. OP, please drop a serious tag on your post. You can't edit postgitals. The technology is not there yet. Join our community Discord, link in description. I'm not in law enforcement, but holy frick, I hope this question gets to heart. Somebody has to do it. I love doing it. You see the people who hate us on the internet and TV, but you don't see the people who love us. They outweigh the bad and make it worth it. Nothing is more rewarding in my opinion. 7 in June myself. Best job there is. I love watching people go from automatically hating me to saying, man officer, you cool. Even after I've chased down and arrested them. Anybody can have the same effect if you put your ego away. For all the law enforcement that are reading this, there may be a lot of hate towards you right now. But some of us know well enough not to put everyone under a single umbrella. I know the majority of you are good. Stay safe. After looking at all the brutal actions taken against peaceful protesters across the nation and the crazy resistance the police unions all seem to have against any reform, I really doubt that now. Cops vote on union leaders and tons of departments just hucking hammered peaceful protesters. I honestly think the good ones are flat out outnumbered. Well, considering 100s of police and their families came out to the court in support of 2 officers in my city that nearly murdered a 75-year-old man, I have to disagree with you. These are not generally good people. If they aren't stepping in to stop their bad colleagues, then no, the majority are not good. I'm a gas station employee and I talk to local suburban cops and in an extremely white area, and I just feel bad for them. They're pretty good people and they just have a crowds of white people disrupting local traffic and yelling at them for hours. I understand more diverse areas and city cops are more problematic, but I just feel bad for these guys here. I appreciate your compassion for others, but systemic racism isn't reserved for urban areas and city cops. Old ways run deep in rural communities. It doesn't matter what color the protesters in your area are. We're in this fight together. I stay in a rural community and I'm not a stranger to what you are seeing. DM me if you want to discuss further. I work in a prison. I'm surrounded by racists. I'm surrounded by people calling for the US military to open fire on American citizens. I'm fairly certain I've heard the N-word thrown around more times in the last 2 weeks than I have in my entire life. Just graduated the academy very recently, so great timing as always. I joined to help people, but people hate me a lot more now, so it's interesting. I work for a good department that's on top of things, but change and reform can be a good thing, or bad if it's done just for approval ratings of politicians. Mostly I'm tired. Trying to learn everything but not being able to escape from it. It's everything going on. The constant all cops are bastards is weird. I don't think I'm a bastard, but who does? You have a different perspective on certain things, but obviously excessive use of force is disgusting. I have yet to see overt racism, but knowing it exists and to be vigilant that it can cloud your judgment if you're not careful is a valuable reminder. The qualified immunity thing is kinda terrifying. We're already at risk being civilly liable for egregious mistakes, but being civilly liable for anything someone doesn't like, parts of the job are going to make people mad. We respond to the worst time of people's lives and people hate us. I think it's too big of a risk to be in the profession if that happens. Also, don't defund police departments. You'll get worse candidates and it'll be just like No Child Left Behind. I'm new, so what the hell do I know though? Cops are people too. Stay strong. My buddy is a cop. He is black and white. He posted how disheartening it was to see his family posting how they wish death to all cops and things like that. Nothing has changed for me or my department. No protests or riots that I'm aware of. Only thing abnormal these past 2 weeks are the amount of S and attempted S. Usually that spike in S happen around the holidays. But the pandemic is keeping people from getting treatment and they're left alone with their own thoughts for too long. Uncle is an officer in a major inner city area and has said that he is working at least 100 hours a week at present time. My brother is a sheriff's deputy in a mostly rural area. Last week he pulled over a black man for a broken tail light. He said the man seemed nervous, so he asked, "Is everything okay?" The man said he was afraid, that he had heard so many stories of violence and thought white officers would hate him. My brother ended up spending half an hour sitting and talking with him. The hardest part of all of this is that no matter how many bad apples show up or what institutional problems need fixed, the good officers are just trying to take care of people. The world needs change, but we can't forget the struggles we put on all the men and women still working for our communities. Detective here who works sexual offenses. I deal with rape victims and identifying their offenders. The real bad stuff. I'm not on the front line and not in the USA, but still feeling it. Still showing up to work every day and doing my job as best as I can. Cop here. It's horrible. I've been in this job for a long time. It's always been the hardest job, Imo. No one likes you. But now it's depressing. I feel depressed all the time these days. In 1 week I went to 9 protests and riots in large cities. I expected to be called a racist and all that. But every day there were people praying for my kids to die in a fire and rhetoric like that. Every day, all day, for 10 hours. Stand there, can't talk, just get called names. Get spit on. Bottle of urine thrown at me. Cops getting murdered. Everyone hates me. It's fucking depressing. I can't imagine anyone wanting to be a police officer now. Like, who is that person? Get ready for a life of divorce, heart problems, a 10-year lower life expectancy, a rate triple the average, and oh, now everyone hates you too. That's what the office is like. Depression, fear and anxiety. It must be tough being held accountable for their actions after being able to pretty much do what they want to the people they swore to protect, with impunity. I'm a Leo in the largest department in the US. I can say that everyone is frustrated and tired. By this point, mostly tired. Many of us have not had a day off for over a week, working 12-16 hours. The daily harassment and vulgar behavior we endure during normal times has been dialed to 11. We get blamed for absolutely everything. Curfew in effect, but if we enforce it we are preventing a peaceful protest. Looters stealing everything, but if we stop them we are brutalizing protesters. Reform is one thing. Defunding is another. You get what you pay for. Do we want to pay for an educated, well-trained, and empathic police force? Sure. But this isn't Disneyland. A well-educated person would never agree to daily humiliation and degradation for the same salary as a Starbucks employee. A well-trained cop would be doing many of the same things they are doing now. Think about that one for a second. As for empathy, we are police officers, not social workers, mental health specialists, homeless outreach, priests, community planners. We deal with people at the lowest moments of their lives and try to bring any amount of closure or healing we can. And here we have the truth. For every one scumbag piece of shit human that made it through a psychological exam and into a police department, there are 10,000 officers that joined to fight back the jungle as hard as they can. To uphold the rule of law, no matter what they or the citizens feel about that law. We aren't heroes. We aren't murderers. We are humans doing an impossible job the best we can. myoutube.com link. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for 3 videos a day.